Okay, section 1.4 is identities and properties. So the first property that we're going to look at is the addition property. And the addition property says, the one that we're going to look at anyway, is the additive identity. When something has an identity, it doesn't change. So A plus 0 or 0 plus A remains A. The additive identity is that A, any number, when we add 0 to it, it stays the same. It does not change its identity. So for example, 3 plus 0 remains 3. 5 plus 0 remains 5. 0 plus 12 stays 12. Any value, when we add 0 to it, maintains its identity. So the additive identity is adding 0. Multiplication also has some properties. We're going to look at a couple of them. The multiplicative identity is 1. Anything multiplied by 1 remains the same or keeps its identity. Now there is a multiplicative property of 0, but it's not an identity. It's just called the multiplicative property of 0. When we multiply any number times 0, it becomes 0. Doesn't matter what it is. So 0 times 12 will be 0. This is not an identity because the number doesn't stay the same, but it is a property of 0. And multiplicative inverse. When you multiply a number by its inverse, we get 0. So 3/7 times 7/3, we get 1. We get 1. So 3 over 7 times 7 over 3. There are two ways to look at this. We can say it's 21 over 21, which we know is 1. Or when we multiply, we know that we can cancel numerators and denominators that match. Looks like everything disappears, but remember when we multiply, the understood value is 1 there. So 7 over 7 is 1, 3 over 3 is 1, my answer is 1. So you need to know these and know their names. So additive identity was adding 0. Multiplicative identity is multiplying by 1. The multiplication property of 0 is that when you multiply by 0, you get 0. And the multiplicative inverse is that when you multiply a number by its inverse, you get 1. Okay? So let's try this a little bit. I want you to write down these directions. Name the property. Then find the value of n. Alright, so example 1. 42 times n equals 42. What property is involved here, and what would be the value of n? Hopefully you said that this is the multiplicative, because it's multiplication. Sorry, M-U-L-T. The multiplication identity, and therefore n would equal 1. This value is being multiplied by something and it stays the same. That's my identity. The value that I use for multiplicative identity is 1. What about 42 plus n? Remains 42. So this is the addition identity because we're using the property of addition, and again the value didn't change, so this is an identity property, and for addition n would equal 0. What about this one? 2/3 n equals 1. So what property did we say when we multiplied something we would get 1 for the answer? This is the multiplication inverse. And for an inverse to work, n would have to be the reciprocal. What about this one? 6n equals 1. Again, multiplying two things together to get 1 has to be my inverse property. What is the inverse of 6? Well, we know that 6 is the same as 6 over 1, so the inverse is 1/6. Last one. What if I have 7n equals 0? Okay, so this is the multiplication property of 0. Multiplication property of 0, and n would have to equal 0. Whoops, lost my screen. N would have to equal 0. Okay? So you'll be asked to identify properties and find values. A few more properties that you may not have seen before. Properties of equality. The reflexive quantity, reflection like in a mirror. Any quantity is equal to itself. We know that 3 has to equal 3. X has to equal X. Any property, no matter what it is, always equals itself. Reflexive property. Symmetric. Symmetric means the same on both sides. If one quantity equals a second quantity, then the second quantity equals the first. Remember that you're pausing to write this stuff down because I'm going to keep going. So pause to write that down. All right, so if, for example, 2 equals B, then we can say that B would also equal 2. Okay? Symmetric. Transitive. Again, pause to write this down after I say it. If one quantity equals a second quantity, and the second quantity equals a third quantity, then the first quantity would equal the third quantity. Write this down. So, if x equals 3 and 3 equals 2 plus 1, so that's the first equals the second, and if the second equals the third, then the first will equal the third. So we can say then x equals, got to take my first, then x also equals 2 plus 1. And the last one, substitution. A quantity may be substituted for its equal in any expression. So if x equals 3, and we have the expression, oops, I don't want to use 3 again, then 4x would equal 4 times 3. So substitution, we can substitute in place of x, I can put a 3 because they're equal to each other. Okay, that's it for the notes. Pretty quick video, and we'll talk about it more in class if we need to. Write down questions if you had any.